Of a late start, but we're still here. So um, we are ready to read Bradley Booth's book. They call him the Miracle Man. And today is Wednesday of the Passover week. So this is chapter 6, Wednesday. It was still early morning when Malachi started down the street in front of the inn. Stretching in an attempt to wake himself up, he shoved the last bite of bread into his mouth and sighed. What should he do now? He had spent the previous day just getting to Bethlehem to speak to an influential merchant interested in Malachi's carpets. Malachi already had quite a stock of carpets in Jerusalem, so he had arranged to meet the merchant to discuss arrangements. But the unexpected encounter with the thief in the valley of Hinnom had delayed him. And then he hadn't arrived in Bethlehem until noon, when the merchants shut their shops and stalls for a couple hours. Not until mid-afternoon did Malachi finally locate the merchant's shop. It had taken more time than he had wanted, but business was business. It was always that way. Business contacts were important, but he couldn't help wondering what was really most important in his life right now. Was it his business? His wife and children? Rachel was a wonderful wife, and he wished that he did not have to spend so much time away from home. Or was it his search for the Messiah, even more vital? Malachi knew that more than anything he wanted to find Jesus and really settle in his mind whether Jesus of Nazareth was the Messiah. The question seemed to occupy his every waking thought. Today, his business appointment completed, Malachi was free to continue his search for the truth about Jesus. Again, he decided he would start at the temple. Despite its noise and confusion, it was still the center of Jerusalem's religious life. Surely someone there would have the answers to his questions. He would just have to avoid the parts of the temple that disturbed him. Anyway, Malachi just knew he couldn't leave Jerusalem until he had spent at least one more day in the temple. Maybe he would even encounter Jesus there, hear him preach, or even see him work some of his famed miracles. By now, Malachi knew that he wanted to meet Jesus more than anything. After all, he had heard reports about him from an innkeeper, Rabbi, Simon, Lazarus of Bethany, the high priest, and the thief in the valley of Hinnom. Malachi knew he couldn't deny it any longer. Jesus must indeed be the long-awaited one. But from the beginning, Malachi had also resolved to be cautious. Others had claimed to be messiahs, only to lead their followers into disaster. Simon, a royal servant, and Alphonse had claimed to be messiahs after the death of Herod, only to lead their followers to destruction by the Romans. If Malachi finally did meet Jesus and accept him, he wanted to do it on his own terms. No sensationalism or revolutionary frenzies. As Malachi took a deep breath of morning air, he let the shafts of sunlight penetrating between the buildings bathe his face with their pleasant warmth. Even at this hour, the streets were crowded. Young girls returning from the city wells wended their way down the narrow streets, and gangling herd boys goaded their unruly flocks of goats and sheep to the city marketplace. Already, old men were sitting together to warm themselves in the morning sunshine and play board games to while away the hours. But the temple guards were still relatively uncrowded when Malachi entered through the beautiful gate. The temple vendors were preparing for the day. Up went the colorful awnings to block out the sun. Out came the tables of the money changers. A fat merchant with dangling gold earrings sat against the courtyard wall, busily counting out stacks of coins and placing them on a low table in front of him. He had copper ones and silver and even some gold ones. A small toddler wandered too close to the little stacks of coins, but an angry scowl from the merchant sent the child back to the folds of his mother's garments. Malachi ambled on through the wide outer courtyard. He realized that it was probably the first real break he had taken since the previous Sabbath to just enjoy himself in the holy city of Jerusalem. So much history, so many stories and traditions. The religious heritage of it all fairly made his head swim. Malachi was proud of everything the city stood for. He passed into the court of the women and chose a stone bench along the wall of the inner court so that he could sit and rest and plan. It was one of the busiest spots in the whole temple. Everyone came here, men, women, and children. Here, everyone brought their offerings and placed them in the trumpet-shaped contribution boxes, some out of a sense of duty, perhaps to help with the upkeep of the place. Others, no doubt, came to parade their wealth. Malachi settled himself back a little farther on the bench. It was a blessing to bring an offering to the house of God, to listen to the glorious chants of praise by the Levite singers, to worship. Yet in spite of the sacredness of the place, it appeared that people had still other reasons for being there too. Women came and went in groups, giggling and chattering quietly among themselves. Malachi noticed men standing in out-of-the-way places, stroking their beards, and he wondered if they were discussing their latest business deals. The way their voices rose and fell with laughter on the early morning air convinced him that that must be what they were doing. For some, being at the temple was just part of their job. A cleaning woman worked her way across the stone pavement, sweeping in short, circular strokes. As Malachi watched the stooped shoulders doing the thankless task, he decided that she must have experienced much of what went on in the temple, at least in the two outer courts. No doubt she had probably heard Jesus in the temple court, or had even seen his miracles. Malachi could ask her about Jesus. Because she worked in the public areas of the temple, she would probably feel less intimidated at the thought of talking to a stranger. At least it was worth a try. "Excuse me, good woman, may I speak with you a moment?" The woman didn't respond at first. She went right on sweeping, engrossed in her task. However, as the arcs of the broom brought her nearer to the place where Malachi was sitting, he tried again. "Good woman, could I trouble you for a moment of your time?" Pausing, the woman turned to face him. "I was wondering," Malachi chose his words carefully, "have you seen Jesus of Nazareth, the miracle worker, lately? Has he been here in Jerusalem, maybe to teach here in the temple?" The woman glanced at the passer-by momentarily, and then back at Malachi. "Yes, he's been here," she responded in a timid voice. "He was here just yesterday." Malachi's pulse quickened as he realized that soon he was going to come face to face with Israel's Messiah. Excitement surged through him as he studied the woman's face, eager for more details, but she simply stood waiting for him to continue. "Did he speak here? Did he perform some miracles?" The woman stepped a little closer to Malachi to clear the way for the temple traffic trying to pass. "I didn't see him perform any miracles. Not here. He was teaching during the morning, and then the scribes and priests began asking him questions." Her voice was even and steady, but Malachi sensed an undercurrent in her tone. Things got pretty exciting for a while when the chief scribe, Rabbi Phineas, began to challenge Jesus. Rabbi Phineas acted as if he was just wanting to have a theological discussion, but I think a lot of onlookers knew that he was trying to trick Jesus into saying something wrong. I could tell, but then she looked around her and lowered her voice. "I think many of these religious leaders are more concerned about their popularity than how they can honor God." Malachi smiled at the woman's statement. "So things got exciting, did they? Were they shouting at each other?" "They were raising their voices. The priests, I mean." Rabbi Phineas kept calm, but at one point, two of the chief priests began to shout. "And what about Jesus?" "Jesus? He just spoke as though he knew exactly what they were going to say, even before they opened their mouth. It was very strange, almost as if he could read their minds." Malachi wished that he could have witnessed the encounter. So what were all of the arguments about? Well, they talked about taxes and marriage and the commandments, I think. Malachi chuckled softly to himself, commenting, "That certainly was a strange combination of topics to discuss." She smiled. "Yes, I suppose it was, but then, as I said, the priests were trying to start arguments so that they could trap Jesus into saying something that would make him look foolish. Splitting hairs, if you ask me." "And you heard all this while sweeping?" The woman blushed and began to pull a shawl up over her chin, but Malachi quickly apologized. "I'm sorry, I was only teasing." He shook his head in embarrassment. "Do you think Jesus will return to the temple today?" The woman folded her hands in front of her, then glanced self-consciously at the worshippers passing by. "No, I don't think he will come back today. In fact, I don't think he will come back again at all." She sounded relieved, but a bit disappointed. "Why not?" Malachi asked in surprise. "Well, when the scribes and Pharisees and all of the priests had nearly worn themselves out, Jesus began to say some pretty serious things. Not that they weren't true, but I just never heard anyone ever get up the courage to say the things he did, right to their faces. It was kind of frightening." Malachi felt a keen sense of disappointment that he had missed the encounter. He wished that he could have been there, and to think that he had been so close. "So he bested them, did he?" The woman smiled sheepishly. "He did at that. I couldn't hear it all, because they were up in the court of Israel, but I saw and heard enough. When Jesus is here, he usually sits while teaching, but this time he stood." She pointed up through the large gate to the high colonnade of the inner temple complex. He walked back and forth among those pillars, and every eye followed him. He called the scribes and Pharisees hypocrites, and he accused them of extortion and fraud in the way they used the temple money. But he referred to them as blind spiritual guides and fools. And he said that even though they claim to be holy in the way they pray and give tithes and offerings, they are actually mean and cruel and heartless, because they don't mind taking from the poor to give to the rich. Emotion flashed in the woman's eyes, as if she were reliving the moment. And Jesus just kept on and on. Nothing could stop him. Her words burst from her like a torrent of water. It was as if he thought he would never again have another chance to say what he needed to say. So he said it all at once. He said the Pharisees and scribes are just like our forefathers who murdered the prophets of God. And then he said they are like the tombs that hold the dead prophets' bones, all whitewashed and pretty outside, but inside defiled and hiding the truth about their real spiritual condition. The woman took a deep breath and became thoughtful. She lowered her voice again, almost to a whisper. And then he said, "O Jerusalem, I have loved you as a mother hen loves her little chicks. You could come to me and be safe under my wings, but you have refused my offer of love and salvation." Malachi knew he needed to let the woman return to her sweeping, but she seemed willing to go on. "Tell me," he said, "how is it that you work here at the temple complex? Is your husband a Levite here?" She lowered her eyes and stared at the stone pavement. "I'm sorry. Did I say the wrong thing?" "Oh, no. It's just that usually no one ever listens to me or seems to care anymore. My husband, God rest his soul, has been gone 8 years. Malachi felt awkward, but the sweeper woman seemed to want to continue. "When my husband grew ill, my son became afraid that we would have to sell the house to pay our bills. So he came to the priest with the deed to our land and signed everything over to them as a Corban temple gift." She sighed. "And now I have no place to live." Malachi was indignant. Corban was a way some used to avoid God's command that they use their land or wealth to support their aging parents. By giving their property as a gift to God, they could still use it until they died without having to spend it on the elderly. Nothing could shame and dishonor a parent more than a son who refused to take care of them. And to refuse to allow the mother to remain in her own home was even worse. I know of the practice, the merchant said, but I can't understand why the authorities allow it. My uncle once gave a Corban gift, and the rest of the family despised him for it. His mother never did forgive him. The cleaning woman seemed resigned to her fate. I never did believe my son's assurances that he would look after me. Anyway, I don't see how it matters now. At least the priests say they would allow me to stay in one of the storage rooms here at the temple, but it's not like home. Her voice trailed off. He knew he shouldn't press the issue further. But the sweeper woman wasn't finished yet. Now, Jesus of Nazareth? Any parent would be honored to have him for a son. She picked the broom up from off the floor and pointed with it to one of the trumpet-shaped offering containers. I'll never forget the day he came here and sat right there beside that offering box. He and his disciples were here, and I was here in the woman's court with my friend Miriam, finishing up my sweeping for the day. She's a widow. It was late afternoon, and she had her offering with her. It was the preparation day, and she always tries to give something as a thank offering on the preparation day. Miriam was afraid that Jesus and his disciples might see her give her offering because it was such a small pittance. She waited for them to leave, but they stayed and stayed. Finally, when Jesus was talking to his disciples, she slipped her coin into the offering box, hoping he wouldn't see her. The coin got lost in the fold. One of the coins got lost in the folds of her shawl, and as she fumbled with it, I could see the men watching her. I knew that Miriam was embarrassed. The sweeper woman hesitated. I don't know why I'm telling you all this. Go on, he encouraged. She paused and then finally added, You see, Miriam only had 2 mites, the smallest coins possible, but it was everything she possessed. The woman shook her head. Other people were dropping in large gifts, some whole bags of money. Later, Miriam told me how badly she felt that she was giving so little compared to others. But do you know, Jesus saw her drop those 2 tiny coins into the box. I'm sure he did, because I heard him say so to his disciples. He said that God would bless Miriam because she had put in more than all of the others, those who did not have to sacrifice anything to give. I just couldn't believe it. He said that about my friend Miriam. Tears trickled down the woman's cheeks now, and she didn't even try to wipe them away.